Hello and welcome back to JJ Reviews. I am JJ and today we are going to be reviewing the long-awaited Fabius Bile book Manflayer, the third and final in the trilogy. Today's book is not going to be in shot, unfortunately, because it's an absolute beast. I can only get the hardback cover, so I'm just going to put that over here. But below it, here you see we have the man himself, Fabius Bile, who we've done quite a bit on in the last couple of reviews. And as you can see, he's very close to being finished now, which is quite nice. So today we will finish him, we will build him, and then we will come to the end of the Fabius Bile saga for now. So, without further ado, on with the review. Manflayer is the third novel in the Fabius Bile trilogy. So far, we've seen Fabius hunt for the lost treasures of the Eldar craft worlds and seek his own legion's lost legacy. He's forged uneasy alliances, brokered deals with immortal beings, all whilst forever pursuing his own work. Having now returned from his trip to Camorra, Fabius is, as ever, pursuing his own work to the future of his new men. However, his endeavours in Camorra have not come without consequences. Fabius is now being hunted by an old acquaintance turned adversary who is devoted to destroying him and all his creations. This turn of events has not gone unnoticed by other powers within the Eye of Terror. The gods themselves have their eye on him. He struggles to forge his own path in a universe where everyone wants him to bend to their will or to be utterly broken. Big deal. A very big deal. The story of this book follows on well from the last novel, Clonelord. Keeping with the established style of Josh Reynolds, this book starts several centuries after the second book, in which time Fabius has travelled to the depths of the dark city of Camorra, where he has learned from the notorious Dark Eldar. For those who do not know them, the Dark Eldar, or Drukhari, are the depraved and treacherous cousins of the Eldar that lived on the craft worlds we met way back in Primogenitor. They are more violent, more vindictive, and totally obsessed with their own carnal pleasures. They are also masters of flesh crafting and blending the organic with the mechanical, so you can see why Fabius was happy to learn from them. I like to imagine they sat down for a friendly chat over coffee and, put ideas up on a big smart board. It was probably a shared workspace, I imagine. They have those in the 41st millennium. Anyway, however, Fabius, it would seem, has upset these murderous aliens and is now being hunted down by them. I have to say that it's a nice change from the tone of the previous two books. In both books, Fabius is the one who is doing the hunting and searching, but here he is the one on the run and on the defensive, and this lets us see how Fabius is when he is on the back foot. One of the things that has been a refreshing trend across all three of these books is that Fabius is far more of an artist or a builder than a lot of other characters across the Warhammer universe. I've mentioned this before, but I want to bring it up again because now we've had enough time to see what he's built and the sheer magnitude of it all. This book lets us see how far his new men have spread, and as such how much he has to lose in the face of his new adversary. This is something which comes off really well in the book. We see where his new men have spread to, into the Imperium, out of the Eye of Terror. They've become a big deal in their own respect, and as a result, it shows that Fabius's plan has been working, and it's nice to see that after two books, being trapped in the Eye of Terror. In the same vein of the other books, being less about destruction and more about construction, it takes a more philosophical approach to the universe as a whole, with characters who in other novels would simply be warriors fighting endlessly. In this book, they express more complex thoughts and opinions than they otherwise would. However, this is all still done through the lens of a warrior who is built to fight and to kill, so it's not totally out of place. I never really understood our father's obsession with martial glory. It always seemed to me more efficient to simply eradicate our foes from orbit. There are hundreds of methods that do not involve orbital insertions and glorious advances into the teeth of enemy fire. Fabius shook his head. Perhaps I overestimate the intelligence of our species. Interestingly, this has been something of an in-joke within the Warhammer community for as long as I can remember. The fact that ground battles are still a thing has been commented upon, and it's gratifying to see it mentioned here. To be honest, though, if it wasn't, there wouldn't be a game. So, swings and roundabouts, which are two things which would probably get destroyed both from orbit and in a ground battle. Moving on. However, here is another quote that is quite poignant in reflection of the state of the Chaos Space Marines, which I've talked about before. We are ghosts, unable to move on and forced by our creators to haunt the battlefields of the coming millennium. I like this quote, as it really does reinforce how lost many of the souls in these books are, but also showing us as readers what happens when they're presented with an opportunity to look at things from a different perspective, through a different lens. And one thing I want to mention as well that made me laugh was how the book in places parodies the more imperial-centric novels that make up most of the Black Library canon. As Fabius is on the defensive, he has to defend a world. And in some respects, that is quite funny to think of, considering how much time he spends looting and plundering. I have to say, I'm also hard-pressed to come up with any serious criticisms or find flaws in this book, but there are a couple of small ones I want to mention. One is the slightly frenetic nature of the first few chapters. You find yourself jumping between camps, and it takes a bit of time to figure out who everyone is, especially as there are a large number of new support characters from the Drakari side of things. Also, for all that the book does take a more thoughtful approach to the universe, it is a shame that Fabius seems to be the only Space Marine who, over the course of the books, has developed in such a way to look to the future with any seriousness. You would have thought that maybe one or two of his students would have taken his lessons to heart, but it's a bit of a shame that none of them have come to see the universe the same way Fabius sees it. But on the whole, there isn't much to complain about at all with this book. When it comes to strengths, however, this book is a very strong ending to the series, and it has the finality of an ending. Now, let me explain what I mean by that, because I know that sounds a bit strange. Over the course of the first two books, we get to know Fabius, his allies, his aims, his creations. This final installment does a fantastic job of paying off many of the parts that Josh Reynolds has set up over the course of Clonelord and Primogenitor. Characters such as Sakara, Savona, Igori, and Ariane all have a cathartic payoff and an acknowledgement as to the time we've put into them as readers, and a lot of the other support characters who have appeared across the series appear. And the thing about this is that the books in this universe tend to have to bleed back into the universe, sometimes where there's a status quo. As you can see from looking at my hands, Fabius Bile is a character who is part of the universe at present. So that would imply at least he is alive. I remember, as a tangent, years ago, they did have characters who were dead, but you could still buy the models, but they don't do that anymore, which, in my opinion, is a good thing. But it's rare to see a series in this universe that has something that feels like an ending. But this one really does, and it allows itself to play out accordingly. It was here that I was able to appreciate how some of the characters have developed over the course of the books, and to give each of them their final farewells. There is also the saying, a story is only as good as its villains, and even though this book is arguably nothing but villains, Fabius's antagonists are quite compelling in their own right. I'd say with these sorts of books, everyone is out for each other, so it's the personal vendettas that really give the book the flavour. Fabius's nemesis here is the homunculi Hexarches, one of the aforementioned flesh crafters of Camorra. He taught Fabius many things in Camorra, and is a teacher to him in the way Fabius was to Oleander from the first book, Ariane, and the others throughout. Hexarches also has his own agenda and is possibly being manipulated, but I won't spoil how. His own insights into Fabius's mind and instincts and knowing what his students like means that he is more than a match for the title character, and of course their conflict is balanced on a knife's edge throughout, which makes the whole thing really quite exciting. However, for me, one of the strongest aspects of this book is the notion of parenthood and life cycles that has been explored throughout the series. It comes into its own in this book for Fabius, not just as a creator or a pseudo-god, but also as a father, which is explored throughout the series, and here at its conclusion, we do see it pay off nicely. Josh Reynolds uses this humanity in Fabius and his Glanshounds throughout the series. And here at its end, we see how these things turn out, with the child, as it were, flying the nest. And here's a nice little quote that summarises how this works out. He imagined that for the first time she saw weakness in him, not of the body, but of the spirit, the need to be in control, the need to be loved, feted for his wisdom and kindness, the need to be the perfect father and God in one. This was a moment between Igori and Fabius. Throughout this book, we've seen Igori being somewhere between a worshipper of Fabius, but something more than that, like we said, very much a child of Fabius, and even though there are others throughout the book who I won't spoil, who are very much billed as Fabius's children, Igori definitely fits into that category, as she is the person who we've seen him raise. And coming back to it now, here at the end, it's really nice to see that final moment between them, when Fabius realises what their relationship is and what he has to do in order, not just for her to survive, but for her to do as he always intended. And that, I think, is quite a moving thing to have in any book. So for me, this says quite a lot about how Fabius was seen by his creations. They didn't obviously just see him as God to be bowed down to. They saw him as a father, as a parental figure, and in many cases he was. When you read the books, you do find that Fabius is seen as this, and it is explored in many different ways throughout the 3 books. But here at the end, one of the things that we do acknowledge is that last step of being a parent, being able to let go of your children. The thing you created, brought into this world, raised and nurtured, Fabius now has to let go in order for the next step to happen. And that's a very minor conflict in this book in its own right, but it does add a certain level of flavour to this idea. And it's one of those very nice things to see in a Warhammer book, that we're not just taking all the ideas of big, grandiose fights, but very personal things, these characters, and treating them as they should be, personal issues that they themselves have to overcome. And giving this to someone like Fabius was probably a fantastic choice, and it's hard to imagine him any other way now, having read it. So, to conclude, Manflayer really is the fitting conclusion to the Fabius Bile story. As I said, he truly is a classic character in the Warhammer canon, and Josh Reynolds does so much work to make him as interesting as possible. You can't help but feel moved by the experience. I would wholeheartedly recommend the series to those who want to see the Warhammer universe, or Warhammer 40,000 universe, from a different perspective, or who want to discover just how interesting a character Fabius Bile is. The 3 books are a fantastic read, and Manflayer really is the epic climax to the series, and it is the climax that it deserves. And whichever moniker you choose for Fabius, because he gets a lot of nicknames in these books, so he's Fabius, Fabius Bile, Clonelord, Manflayer, Spider. The truth is that Fabius Bile's endeavours are on the same scale as any other character in the Grimdark. His triumphs are as epic, and his losses even more tragic, because at his heart, he is a builder, and an idealist, as they say. He wants something for the future. And that's something which I think is a real treat and a real gem in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. And that is something, I believe, should be celebrated. And it would be nice to see more books about characters like this, now that we know it can be done. And I really do look forward to seeing him if he does return in some form or another. So there he is, Fabius Bile and his little friend Dennis. They are all painted and ready to go. The only thing left to do now is build them. And for that, we need some movie magic. Yes, that is right, I used the edit to build him. Hooray. So this is Fabius Bile, all built, as you can see. Had a great time building him and painting him. I did actually film building him, but it looked clumsy AF, so I left it out. But here we are, and Dennis as well. He's the other fun one. So that is the end of the Fabius Bile saga here on GG Reviews. I think what's going to come up next is probably going to be things like the Siege of Terror, and if you do have any books you want me to review, then please do leave them in the comments below. And whilst I know this isn't really a model reviewing channel or series, the one thing I will say, having spent enough time with Fabius, is that when you read him in the books and you see him like this really is how I imagine Fabius to be. Like, just confident, strolling around, upright, the chirurgeon on his back, not giving a flying figures about anything. So thanks again for watching, like and subscribe, and I will see you next time round.